I saw my wife Sarah's name flashing on the screen. We'd been married for 11 years. Good years, I thought. The kind where you finish each other's sentences and know how the other takes their coffee without asking. We'd built a life together in a one-bedroom apartment that became a two-bedroom. Then finally the corner unit with the morning light she'd always wanted. We'd painted walls at midnight, assembled furniture while arguing over instructions neither of us could read properly, survived a kitchen renovation that nearly ended in divorce before any inheritance was ever mentioned. We had inside jokes that made no sense to anyone else and a rhythm to our evenings that felt like home. But her voice that afternoon carried a tone I'd never heard before, sharp and glittering like broken glass catching sunlight, beautiful and dangerous and completely unfamiliar. "John, I just got the call," she said, words tumbling out so fast they crashed into each other like cars on black ice. "Uncle Edward's estate. It's mine. All of it. $8.2 million. I waited for the part where she'd say, "We're set," or "Can you believe it?" or "We need to celebrate," or anything that included both of us in the same future. Instead, what came next made the fluorescent lights above my desk seem suddenly too bright, too exposing, like I was sitting under an interrogation lamp. "I need you out of the apartment by tonight. Pack your essentials. The rest we'll figure out later, but you need to go now." "I'm done, John. I'm finally done." The line stayed open, and I realized with a cold clarity that she wanted to hear my reaction, wanted to taste whatever panic or pleading might come through the speaker. She wanted the satisfaction of hearing me beg or shout or crumble. I disappointed her. "What attorney confirmed this?" I asked, keeping my voice level the way you do when you're actually screaming inside, the way you speak when a doctor is giving you bad news and you need the facts before the emotion. "What court processed the filing? What's the case number?" There was a pause, just half a breath, barely a second, but in that silence I heard everything I needed to know. She hadn't expected questions. She'd expected compliance. "That doesn't matter," she recovered quickly, her voice hardening with irritation. "What matters is I'm done sharing my life with someone who never amounted to anything. You've been coasting for years, John. Living off my ambition, my connections, my family's goodwill. Tomorrow at 10 a.m., there's a meeting at the probate office. Be there or don't. I honestly don't care anymore. But either way, you're out of my apartment tonight." My apartment, not our apartment. The possessive pronoun landed like a slap. The thing about sudden betrayal is that it doesn't feel real at first. Your brain rejects it the way your body rejects poison, trying to expel something that doesn't belong. I sat there in my cubicle on the 8th floor of a building I'd worked in for 7 years, surrounded by the familiar hum of copy machines and the burnt coffee smell that had become a part of my DNA. And I felt like I was watching someone else's life implode through a window. The guy 2 desks over, Marcus from accounting, laughed at something on his screen, that braying laugh he had that usually annoyed me, but now sounded almost comforting in its normalcy. A woman walked past with a stack of folders pressed against her chest, her heels clicking that rhythm that meant she was late for something. The printer jammed, and someone swore softly. Everything continued at its normal, indifferent pace, which somehow made Sarah's words feel even more unreal, like she'd called from an alternate dimension where cruelty was currency and 11 years could be erased with a single phone call and a windfall she hadn't even earned. I didn't announce anything to my coworkers. I didn't make a scene or grab my coat dramatically or storm out the way people do in movies. I finished the 2 emails I'd been working on, mundane things about quarterly projections and meeting schedules that suddenly seemed absurd in their insignificance. I closed my laptop with the same careful click I used every evening, logged out of the systems I was supposed to log out of, and stood up. My legs felt steady, which surprised me. In the elevator, my reflection stared back at me from the polished steel doors, a 42-year-old man in a wrinkled blue shirt and glasses that had slipped down my nose from the humidity of an overheated building. I looked ordinary, forgettable even, the kind of person you'd pass on the street without a second glance. Thinning hair that I'd stopped worrying about years ago, a slight paunch from too many desk lunches, shoulders that slouched from decades of hunching over keyboards. That ordinariness had never bothered me before. I'd never needed to be remarkable. I'd been content being steady, reliable, present. But I wondered in that moment if Sarah had been silently cataloging my unremarkable qualities for years, building a case against me that I'd never seen coming. tallying every missed opportunity and unambitious choice until they added up to a justification for what she was doing now. The parking garage smelled like exhaust and concrete, and that particular staleness that comes from being underground. I found my car, a 7-year-old sedan that Sarah had always complained about, said it made us look poor when we pulled up to her company events. I'd offered to upgrade countless times, but there was always something else we needed to save for, something she wanted for the apartment or a vacation she'd been planning. Now I understood those refusals differently. She'd been keeping me small, keeping us looking modest, maybe so this moment would feel more justified. Look at what I was leaving behind. Look at how little I'd achieved. Look at how much I deserved better. The drive home should have taken 30 minutes in normal traffic, but I made it in 18. Not because I was speeding, though I probably was, but because every light seemed to turn green just as I approached, as if the universe had decided to stop testing me for once and just let me get to the destruction waiting on the other end. Our apartment building rose up against the late afternoon sky. 12 stories of red brick and black fire escapes that we'd chosen together 5 years ago because Sarah loved the corner unit on the 9th floor with windows that faced east and caught the morning light. She'd stood in the empty apartment during our first viewing and said, "This is it, John. This is where we build our future." And I believed her. I'd painted every room the colors she picked, spent weekends installing the shelves she sketched on napkins, hung the curtains she'd debated over for 3 weeks. I'd lived in that space believing it was ours, not realizing I was just a tenant she'd been planning to evict the moment something better came along. The lobby smelled like lemon cleaner and something else, something metallic that I couldn't place. The front desk clerk, Marcus, a different Marcus from the one at work, a guy in his 60s who'd always greeted me with a nod and a comment about the weather or the local sports team, suddenly became very interested in the logbook in front of him. His eyes didn't lift when I walked past. That told me everything. She'd already been here, already poisoned whatever goodwill existed, already spun a story that made me the villain or the victim or whatever role served her narrative best. I didn't stop to ask. I didn't try to explain or defend. I just headed for the elevator, pressed 9, and watched the numbers climb with a detachment that surprised me. 1, 2, 3, each floor a moment closer to whatever scene she'd staged. The apartment door was unlocked. That detail hit me harder than anything Sarah had said on the phone. An unlocked door in a city where we'd always been careful about security, where Sarah herself had insisted on a deadbolt and a chain and a peephole camera. An unlocked door meant she wasn't afraid of me coming back. It meant she wanted me to walk into whatever scene she'd staged, wanted me off balance and reactive. It meant she was so certain of her power in this moment that she didn't even need the basic protection of a locked door. I pushed it open slowly, and the first thing I saw was light, every lamp in the apartment blazing even though it was barely past 3 in the afternoon, even though we had massive windows that let in plenty of natural light. She'd turned on every single light, overhead fixtures, table lamps, even the small reading light by the couch that we never used. The apartment was lit up like a stage, like she was presenting something for an audience. The second thing I saw was the dining table, the one we bought at a estate sale in Connecticut 3 years ago. Solid oak that had cost more than I thought we should spend, but Sarah had insisted was an investment. On it sat a folder, positioned with such perfect alignment that it looked like a piece of performance art. The edges were parallel to the table's edge. A pen rested on top, angled at exactly 45 degrees toward a single signature line. The way a museum might position an artifact for maximum impact, the way a hunter might set a trap. Sarah stood by the window with her back to me, phone in hand, shoulders straight in a way that suggested she'd been practicing this posture in the mirror. She'd changed clothes since this morning. When I'd left for work, she'd been wearing yoga pants and an old sweater. Now she wore slacks and a blouse I didn't recognize, something new, something expensive looking. She dressed for this moment. She didn't turn around when I entered, just spoke to her reflection in the glass, her voice carrying that new quality I'd heard on the phone, confidence mixed with contempt and something that sounded almost like excitement. "You're faster than I expected," she said. "I thought you might stop for drinks. Isn't that what men do when their wives leave them? Drown their sorrows?" I didn't take the bait. I set my bag down carefully on the floor by the entrance, measuring each movement, trying to maintain some sense of control in a situation designed to strip me of it. I walked to the table slowly, each step deliberate. The folder was thick, maybe 20 pages, with a cover sheet that read dissolution of marriage, immediate separation agreement, asset distribution, occupancy termination, in a font that was trying very hard to look official, some serif typeface that mimicked legal documents. I flipped through it slowly, scanning headers and clauses, looking for the things that mattered, the things that would tell me if this was real or theater. Page 1. Declaration of intent to dissolve marriage. Page 2. Acknowledgement of irreconcilable differences. Page 3. Asset inventory and distribution schedule. Page 4. Immediate vacate notice. The language was dense, full of whereas and heretofore and party of the first part. Words that sounded legal but felt hollow, like someone had copied and pasted from a template without understanding what any of it meant. I kept flipping, page after page of demands and declarations, all slanted heavily in Sarah's favor. She kept everything, the apartment, the furniture, the savings account, even my grandmother's watch that had been promised to me before we were married. I got nothing but permission to leave. And nowhere, not on any page, did I see the things that actually mattered. No court seal, no case number, no filing date, no notarization, no attorney stamp with a bar number, no witness signatures. Just pages and pages of language that sounded legal the way a costume sounds authentic, convincing from a distance, but falling apart under scrutiny. This wasn't a legal document. This was a threat dressed up in 12-point font and presented on heavy paper stock. Who drafted this? I asked, keeping my eyes on the paper, not giving her the satisfaction of my full attention. My attorney, she said too quickly, the words coming out in a rush that suggested she'd rehearsed this answer. Everything's legitimate. You're just wasting time. The meeting tomorrow will formalize everything. This is just to get us started, to make the process smoother. I pulled out my phone and started photographing each page, holding it steady, making sure the lighting captured every word, every margin, every header. The envelope it came in sat on the table with embossed letterhead that said Whitmore and Associates, Attorneys at Law, in gold script that was probably meant to look impressive, but instead looked like something printed at a copy shop. Sarah's hand shot out toward my phone, fingers grasping at air like she could snatch it away through sheer will. "Stop that," she snapped, her voice rising for the first time, cracking the veneer of control she'd been maintaining. "You don't need copies. Just sign and go. This doesn't have to be difficult." I looked at her then, really looked at her for the first time since walking in, and what I saw was almost sad. Her makeup was fresh but applied too heavily, like armor, foundation layered thick enough to cover the skin underneath, contour lines sharp enough to cut. Her hair was styled in a way she usually reserved for important meetings, pulled back tight in a way that looked painful. She'd dressed for this moment, choreographed it, probably walked through it in her head a dozen times, imagining how I'd react, what I'd say, how she'd respond. She'd built a whole scene in her mind, and I was refusing to follow the script. But her eyes gave her away. They were bright with something that wasn't quite confidence, something closer to desperation wrapped in bravado, the look of someone who's bet everything on a bluff and is terrified someone might call it. I'd seen that look before, years ago, when she'd lied to her father about where we'd gone on vacation because the truth didn't sound impressive enough. She'd been so confident in that lie, so committed to it, right up until the moment he'd asked a question she hadn't prepared for, and her whole face had shifted, just for a second, into something cornered and afraid. That's what I saw now, hiding behind the expensive blouse and the rehearsed posture. "No," I said simply, and watched her face shift through confusion, anger, and something that might have been fear before settling back into manufactured authority. "What do you mean, no?" she demanded. "I mean, no, I'm not stopping. I'm documenting this. And no, I don't think this is legitimate. And no, I'm not going to make this easy for you." Her jaw clenched. I could see the muscles working, see her struggling to maintain the role she'd cast herself in. "Are you signing or not?" she demanded, volume rising to fill the space I wasn't giving her, trying to dominate through sheer force of sound. I sat down at the dining table, pulled the pen toward me, and signed where she'd indicated. Not with my usual signature, but with my full legal name, printed clearly, the way you sign when you want there to be no doubt about who put the ink on the paper. I signed every place she'd marked, every highlighted line, every X in the margin. I signed it all. Not because the papers meant anything legally, they didn't, but because I understood something in that moment that would become crucial in the days ahead. Signing didn't scare me. Signing was just ink on paper. A signature on a document with no legal standing was meaningless, worthless, nothing more than scribbles on expensive stationery. What scared me was staying in a room with someone who needed my humiliation to feel powerful, someone who'd orchestrated this entire scene to watch me break, that I closed the folder, stood, and met her eyes with a calmness that I could see unsettled her. Her pupils dilated slightly. Her breathing changed. She'd expected anger or tears or pleading, and my calm was throwing off whatever script she'd written. "Enjoy your windfall," I said, keeping my voice neutral, almost pleasant. "Just remember that luck and ownership aren't the same thing. One is chance, the other is earned." Her jaw tightened. "You sound poetic for someone with nothing," she shot back. And there was real venom in it now, the kind that comes when someone's victory isn't tasting as sweet as they'd imagined. "Where are you even going to go? Back to your mother's basement? Maybe you can find a friend desperate enough to take you in, though I doubt it. You never were good at maintaining relationships." I didn't answer. I didn't give her a stage or an audience or any more of my attention. I turned and went to the bedroom we'd shared for 5 years, the room where we'd made love and argued and planned futures that now felt like fiction. I pulled out the black duffel bag from the top shelf of the closet, the one we'd bought for a trip to Colorado that never happened because Sarah had gotten a work opportunity she couldn't pass up. I packed methodically, documents first because those were irreplaceable. Birth certificate, passport, social security card, the folder of insurance papers and tax returns from the filing cabinet she'd probably already mentally donated. Then medication, the blood pressure pills I'd been on since my 30s, the allergy medication I needed to function in the spring. Phone charger, laptop cord, the external hard drive with photos from before digital cameras made every memory disposable. 2 changes of clothes, nothing fancy, just jeans and shirts that fit and didn't require dry cleaning. Toiletries from the bathroom, toothbrush, deodorant, the prescription glasses I kept as backup in case I lost my primary pair. The rest could stay. The books on my nightstand, the jackets in the closet, the running shoes I'd bought 6 months ago with intentions I'd never followed through on. Objects are just objects. They only matter when you let them become symbols, when you let them represent more than they are. I'd learned that lesson when my father died, and I'd watched my mother agonize over every piece of furniture, every kitchen utensil, trying to decide what to keep and what to let go, as if the objects themselves contained his presence. They didn't. He was gone, and the objects were just objects, and eventually she'd understood that and let most of it go. I understood it now. This wasn't about the stuff. This was about the life we'd built, and that life was already gone, had probably been gone for months or years while I wasn't paying attention. When I came back through the living room, Sarah was on her phone, not bothering to lower her voice, wanting me to hear, performing for an audience of one. "Yes, listed tonight," she was saying to someone, pacing near the window with that aggressive energy she got when she was closing a deal at work. "Cash buyers preferred. Market it as an opportunity. Corner unit, east-facing, recently renovated. We can close fast. Everything will be settled by tomorrow. Tomorrow at 10, everything's handled. I'll have full authority by then. Tomorrow at 10. The same time she'd mentioned on the phone earlier. The same time as the meeting she'd told me about. I filed that away, another piece of a puzzle I was just beginning to see, another thread that didn't quite match the story she was telling. I stopped at the door and looked at the clock on the wall, the one we bought at a flea market in Brooklyn 3 years ago, black metal with white numbers and hands that ticked loud enough to hear across the room. Sarah had wanted it because it looked industrial chic, whatever that meant. 3:47 p.m. I committed the time to memory, though I didn't yet know why it would matter. Didn't yet know that I'd be constructing a timeline that would become crucial in ways I couldn't imagine. In the hallway, my phone buzzed with a text from Sarah, even though she was 20 feet away, even though we could have this conversation face to face if she wanted. "Confirm you're not coming back." I took a screenshot of the message, noting the timestamp, 3:49 p.m., and added it to the growing folder of evidence I didn't yet know I was building. I walked to the elevator without responding. Let her wonder. Let her sit with the uncertainty of not knowing what I was thinking or planning. She'd spent the afternoon trying to control me. The least I could do was refuse to be controlled. Outside, The October air bit at my face with a sharpness that felt clarifying, cleansing, like stepping out of a smoky room into wind. The sky was that particular shade of gray that promises rain without delivering it, heavy clouds sitting low enough to make the buildings look taller. I didn't go to a friend's house because I didn't want to explain this yet, didn't want to turn my humiliation into a story I had to tell and retell until it became a performance. I didn't call my brother because he'd never liked Sarah anyway, had warned me years ago that she had an edge that would eventually cut me, and I wasn't ready to hear, "I told you so," even if he was kind enough not to say it. I drove to a hotel I'd passed 1,000 times, but never entered, a mid-range place called the Carlisle Inn, sandwiched between a pharmacy and a dry cleaner on a street that was busy enough to feel safe, but not so busy it was loud. A simple place with a 24-hour desk and security cameras above the entrance, visible and obvious, the kind that actually record instead of just pretending to for deterrent effect. Not luxury, just visibility. Not comfort, just documentation. I was starting to think in those terms without realizing it yet, starting to see the world as a series of provable facts versus claims, evidence versus story. At check-in, I asked for a room on a higher floor, away from the elevator, near an emergency exit. The clerk, a young woman with tired eyes and a name tag that said Michelle in the hotel's corporate font, processed my card without comment. She'd probably seen 1,000 versions of me. Men checking in with a single bag and eyes that looked elsewhere. Men who paid for rooms by the night instead of booking ahead. Men who were between one thing and the next thing and trying not to think about the gap in between. As I signed the registration form, my phone started buzzing again, a cascade of texts from Sarah stacking up like accusations. "This is really happening. Don't think you can change my mind. You had your chance to be someone. I'm moving on with my life. Tomorrow you'll see how serious I am." I let them stack up, each one a little more desperate than the last, each one revealing more than she probably intended. People who are truly confident don't need to announce it. They don't need to perform their certainty for an audience. The fact that she was still texting me, still trying to provoke a response, told me everything I needed to know. She wasn't as sure as she was pretending to be. The hotel room was exactly what I needed, anonymous and clean, with a bed that didn't carry memories and a television I had no intention of turning on. Generic landscape art on the walls, the kind of paintings that exist in 10,000 hotel rooms across the country, mountains or beaches or forests that could be anywhere and therefore are nowhere. A desk with a lamp and a chair. A bathroom with white towels and small bottles of shampoo and soap. A window that looked out onto the street below, where cars passed, and people walked and life continued without acknowledging that mine had just been dismantled. I set my bag against the wall, sat on the edge of the mattress, and finally let myself feel the full weight of what had happened. Not the inheritance, that was just money, just numbers in an account that Sarah apparently thought gave her permission to erase me from her life. The real shock was the pleasure she'd taken in trying to break me, the way her voice had lifted with excitement when she told me to pack, the satisfaction she'd drawn from what she thought was my defeat. The unlocked door, the staged folder, the perfect lighting, the rehearsed lines. She'd enjoyed it. She'd planned it. She'd looked forward to it. I'd married someone I thought I knew, someone who cried at romantic movies and rescued stray cats and sent thank you cards for birthday gifts. But the woman on the phone that afternoon, the woman standing at the window in clothes she'd changed into specifically for my eviction, that was a stranger wearing my wife's voice, using my wife's face to do things the person I'd loved never could have done. My phone buzzed again, but this time it wasn't Sarah. It was an email forwarded from her account, the kind of forward that happens when someone wants you to see something but doesn't want to admit they sent it, when they want plausible deniability but also want you to have the information. The subject line read, "Estate Settlement Meeting, Required Attendance, October 19th, and the body was short and formal, the kind of language that lawyers use when they're not trying to be friendly. Location, Probate Court Building, 14th floor, Conference Room C. Time, 10 a.m. Presiding, Estate Administrator Wallace Green. Representing the estate, Whitmore and Associates." And then the line that made me sit up straighter, made my heart rate pick up for the first time since Sarah's initial call. Presence of the following parties is required by the terms of the will. Sarah Rebecca Thompson, primary beneficiary. John Michael Patterson, designated observer and verification party. Designated observer and verification party. Not invited. Not requested. Required. By the terms of the will. My full name, spelled correctly, listed not as her spouse, not as a former husband, not as an interested party, but as something specific, something that had a function, a role, a purpose beyond just existing in Sarah's orbit. I read the email 3 more times, parsing each sentence for meaning, looking for the trick or the trap. The law firm name matched the letterhead on the folder Sarah had left on the table, Whitmore and Associates, but everything else felt different, heavier, more real. This had a case number. This had an administrator's name. This had specific legal language that the fake separation papers had tried to mimic but couldn't quite achieve. I looked at the timestamp on the email. Sent at 2:13 p.m., 34 minutes before Sarah called to throw me out, 41 minutes before I answered the phone in my cubicle and heard her announce her inheritance and my eviction in the same breath. She'd seen this email before calling me. She'd read these same words, seen my name listed as a required party, and made a choice. She decided to get ahead of it, to control the narrative before I could understand my position. That told me 2 things with absolute clarity. First, she was afraid of what this meant, afraid of my involvement, afraid of whatever role Uncle Edward had assigned me in this process. Second, she was sloppy when afraid, moved too fast, revealed too much, created evidence of her state of mind that I could use later even if I didn't yet know how. I opened my phone and made a call I'd been avoiding for 3 years, not because the relationship was bad, but because asking for help had always felt like admitting defeat, like acknowledging that I couldn't handle my own life. My pride had always been quiet but strong, the pride of someone who fixed his own problems and didn't ask for favors and believed that accepting help meant you were weak. That pride felt stupid now, sitting in a hotel room with a duffel bag and a forwarded email and a marriage that had ended before I'd even known it was in danger. The voice that answered was brisk and professional, no warmth, but no judgment either. Exactly the tone I needed. Cardozo and Associates. This is Jennifer speaking. I need to speak with someone about an estate matter, I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. Specifically about beneficiary rights and spousal claims, and what it means when someone is listed as a designated observer. There was a pause, the sound of keys clicking, someone pulling up a schedule or a file, or whatever lawyers look at when a potential client calls. Are you currently represented by counsel? No. Can you come in tomorrow morning? We have an opening at 8 a.m., 2 hours before Sarah's meeting. 2 hours to understand what I was walking into, what my role actually was, whether I had any leverage or protection, or if I was just going to be a witness to my own irrelevance. I'll be there, I said. And I should mention, this is time sensitive. The meeting is at 10 tomorrow morning. Then we'll make sure you're prepared, Jennifer said, and something in her voice, a quiet competence, a suggestion that she'd handled situations like this before, made me feel like maybe I wasn't as alone as I'd felt 15 minutes ago. The call ended without small talk, without reassurance, just process. That was exactly what I needed. Not comfort, not sympathy, just a clear path forward that I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was panicking, though part of me wanted to curl up and catastrophize and imagine worst-case scenarios until they felt inevitable. But a different part of me, a part one didn't know was there, had switched into a mode I recognized from my work, the methodical cataloging of variables and outcomes that happens when a project goes wrong, and you need to find the error in the system, trace it back to its source, understand what broke and when and why so you can fix it or at least prevent it from breaking again. I lay in the dark hotel room, staring at the ceiling where the shadows of passing headlights drew temporary patterns, and I walked through every conversation Sarah and I had had over the past 6 months, looking for the moment when her eyes started seeing me differently, when I stopped being her husband and started being an obstacle. I didn't sleep that night, not because I was panicking, though part of me wanted to curl up and catastrophize and imagine worst-case scenarios until they felt inevitable. But a different part of me, a part one didn't know was there, had switched into a mode I recognized from my work, the methodical cataloging of variables and outcomes that happens when a project goes wrong, and you need to find the error in the system, trace it back to its source, understand what broke and when and why so you can fix it or at least prevent it from breaking again. I lay in the dark hotel room, staring at the ceiling where the shadows of passing headlights drew temporary patterns, And I walked through every conversation Sarah and I had had over the past 6 months, looking for the moment when her eyes started seeing me differently, when I stopped being her husband and started being an obstacle. That I found it around May, right after we'd gotten the news that Uncle Edward's health was failing, that he'd been moved to hospice, that it was a matter of weeks, maybe days. Sarah had started spending more time on her phone, texting people I didn't know, having conversations that stopped when I entered the room. She'd started taking calls on the balcony with the door closed, coming back inside with an expression I couldn't read, something between excitement and anxiety. More time visiting family, though when I'd offered to come with her, she'd found reasons why I shouldn't, why it was better if she went alone, why Uncle Edward was too tired for visitors plural, why the family needed space to process. More time talking about futures in plural that somehow never included me, sentences that started with when I instead of when we, plans that existed in a world where I was absent or irrelevant. I'd noticed but hadn't named it, had chalked it up to stress or work or the normal drift that happens in long marriages. Those periods where you're both busy and tired and existing in parallel rather than together, where you go days without a real conversation beyond logistics about dinner and bills and whose turn it is to buy toilet paper. But it hadn't been drift. She hadn't been pulling away because she was stressed or tired or processing grief. She'd been preparing, calculating, building a future that didn't include me and waiting for the right moment to make it official. The inheritance wasn't the cause of our marriage ending. It was the excuse, the catalyst, the thing that gave her permission to do what she'd apparently wanted to do for months. At 6:30 a.m., I was already awake, showered, and dressed in the one suit I'd packed, navy blue and slightly wrinkled from being folded into a duffel bag, but clean and professional enough. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror and tried to recognize myself. Same face I'd had yesterday, same slightly crooked nose from a baseball injury in high school, same eyes that were more gray than blue depending on the light, same receding hairline that had started in my 30s and was now a fact of life I'd stopped trying to hide. But something felt different, something in the expression or the posture or the way I held my jaw. I looked like someone who'd been tested and was still standing, not victorious, but not broken either, just present and ready for whatever came next. I ate the complimentary breakfast in the hotel lobby, forcing down toast that tasted like cardboard and coffee that was too bitter, too strong, the kind that's been sitting on the burner too long and developed that burnt, acrid quality that coats your tongue. But empty stomachs make for cloudy thinking, make emotions sloppy, and I needed to be sharp, needed every advantage I could get. At 7:45, I was already in my car, driving through morning traffic that felt like molasses, every light turning red just as I approached, every lane slowing to a crawl for no visible reason, the universe returning to its normal pattern of testing me after yesterday's uncharacteristic generosity. At 7:58, I walked into a law office that smelled like old books and new carpet, where a receptionist who looked barely old enough to be out of college directed me to a conference room on the 3rd floor. The building was older, one of those converted brownstones that used to be someone's mansion before being subdivided into professional offices, with crown molding and hardwood floors and windows that actually opened instead of being sealed shut. The conference room had glass walls that looked out onto the rest of the office, all transparency, nowhere to hide, everything visible. A woman with silver hair and sharp eyes sat at the table with a yellow legal pad and 3 pens arranged in a perfect line, the kind of person who looked like they'd been born organized. "I'm Jennifer Cardozo," she said, standing to shake my hand once, firm and brief, not the limp, performative handshake some people give, but actual contact that meant something. "Tell me what happened, chronologically, starting from the first unusual thing you noticed, and don't skip the details that embarrass you or make you look bad. Those are usually the ones that matter most in cases like this." So I did. I told her everything, starting with the phone call at 2:47 p.m., the exact time because I'd looked at the clock when it rang, a habit from work where every minute of every call got logged. I told her about Sarah's voice, the tone I'd never heard before, the way she'd paused when I asked questions, the way she'd wanted me out immediately. By tonight, no discussion. I told her about the unlocked apartment door, which still bothered me more than I could articulate, something about that detail that felt especially cruel, especially calculated. I told her about the folder on the table, the theatrical lighting, The fake legal documents that looked real from a distance but fell apart under scrutiny. I showed her the screenshots I'd taken, the timeline I'd been building without consciously deciding to build it, the texts that kept coming even after I'd left, each one revealing a little more desperation, a little less control. And I showed her the forwarded email, the one that listed me as a designated observer and verification party, the one that had been sent before Sarah called me, the one that changed everything about how I understood the situation. Jennifer listened without interrupting, making notes in handwriting so small and precise it looked like code. When I finished, she set her pen down in exactly the same position it had been before, perfectly aligned with the other two, and looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read, something between sympathy and strategic calculation. "Your wife made 3 critical errors," she said, her voice carrying the kind of certainty that comes from having seen this pattern before, having handled cases where people's worst impulses created exploitable weaknesses. First, she tried to use emotional leverage before understanding the legal framework. She attempted to intimidate you into compliance without knowing whether she actually had the authority to make the demands she was making. That's amateur hour, frankly. Second, she created a paper trail that directly contradicts her claimed authority. Those fake legal documents, the texts, the early listing of the apartment, all of it establishes a pattern of overreach that will undermine her credibility if this becomes contested. Third, and most importantly from our perspective, she assumed you'd panic instead of document. She expected you to react emotionally, to sign whatever she put in front of you, to disappear quietly. The fact that you didn't, the fact that you photographed everything and kept records and came here, that changes the entire dynamic. "What does the email mean?" I asked, the question that had been burning in my mind since I'd first read those words. "What does designated observer and verification party actually mean in legal terms?" She leaned back in her chair, fingers steepled in front of her face, thinking. "It means that whoever drafted this will, whoever administered Uncle Edward's estate, determined that you have standing in this process. Whether that's as a potential beneficiary yourself, which seems unlikely given the way it's worded, or as a witness to validate certain claims, or as a check on Sarah's authority to ensure she doesn't violate the terms of the inheritance, I can't say without seeing the actual will document. But here's what I can tell you with absolute certainty. You're not incidental to this process. You're not there as a courtesy. You're structural. Your presence is required, which means your absence would invalidate whatever happens at that meeting. That gives you leverage, even if we don't fully understand the extent of it yet." She glanced at her watch, a practical silver thing without any ornamentation. "We have an hour and 32 minutes before that meeting starts. Let me make some calls, see if I can get a copy of the will before we walk in there blind. In the meantime, I need you to understand something fundamental about how this is going to proceed." She leaned forward, and her voice took on an intensity that made me sit up straighter. "You're not there to argue. You're not there to defend yourself or explain your marriage or justify your existence. You're there to witness and record. Let the process happen. Let Sarah overplay her hand if she's going to overplay it. People who move fast make mistakes, and mistakes become records, and records become leverage. Your job is to stay calm, stay quiet, and let her create the evidence we'll use later if we need to." What followed was the fastest, most intense education in estate law I'd ever received, condensed and targeted like someone was downloading information directly into my brain. Jennifer walked me through beneficiary designations, the difference between being named in a will and actually receiving assets, the concept of conditional inheritance where money comes with strings attached, requirements that have to be met before anything transfers. She explained spousal claims, how long marriages create certain presumptions about shared property, how inheritance technically belongs to the individual but can become marital property depending on how it's used, how Sarah's immediate attempt to kick me out might actually work against her if she was planning to use estate funds to do it. She explained the role of estate administrators, neutral parties appointed to execute the will according to its terms, not to advocate for any beneficiary, but to ensure the deceased's wishes are followed exactly as written. She explained restrictive clauses, conditions that limit how and when money can be accessed, provisions that protect assets from being squandered or misused. And she explained observation rights, How some wills include provisions requiring certain people to witness and verify compliance specifically to prevent the kind of overreach Sarah seemed to be attempting. The fact that you were designated tells me Uncle Edward either didn't fully trust Sarah's judgment, Jennifer said, or he wanted to ensure she didn't do exactly what she's doing right now, which is treating an inheritance as permission to blow up her life without considering the consequences. At 9:23, Jennifer's phone rang. She answered, listened, made 3 more notes on her legal pad, and hung up without saying goodbye. I got a copy of the relevant sections, she said. And this is very interesting. Uncle Edward's will include specific provisions regarding the marital residence. Sarah cannot use estate funds to alter your living situation without following proper legal procedures. She cannot evict you. She cannot change the locks. She cannot force you out, not immediately, not without going through formal channels that could take months. The inheritance is hers, but it comes with obligations, and one of those obligations is not using the money as a weapon against family members. I felt something loosen in my chest, a tension I didn't know I'd been holding. So the apartment? Still yours as much as hers until a court says otherwise, Jennifer confirmed. Those fake documents she had you sign? Meaningless. Even if they were real, even if she'd gotten you to sign actual legal papers, you can't waive occupancy rights under duress, and my wife just inherited millions and is throwing me out definitely qualifies as duress. She stood, gathering her things with the same precise efficiency she'd shown throughout our conversation. Let's go see what else she didn't understand about the situation she's walked into. At 9:42, we arrived at the probate building, a gray stone structure that looked like it had been designed during an era when civic architecture was supposed to inspire respect and maybe a little fear, all columns and carved details and steps that seemed unnecessarily steep. Jennifer walked beside me, not talking, just present in a way that felt like reinforcement, like having backup even though I wasn't going into battle. We entered through double doors that were probably original to the building, heavy wood with brass handles worn smooth by decades of hands, into a waiting area that smelled like old paper and industrial cleaner and something else. Something that might have been anxiety or resignation or just the accumulated emotional residue of countless people dealing with death and money and the complicated intersection of the two that the space was full, but not crowded, people sitting in chairs that looked like they'd been purchased in bulk sometime in the 1980s and never replaced, clutching folders and speaking in whispers that somehow felt louder than shouting. An elderly couple sat near the window, holding hands with the kind of grip that suggested they'd been doing it so long they didn't even notice anymore. A man in a too-tight suit argued in a harsh whisper with someone on his phone, saying, "I don't care what she says. The will is clear," over and over like a mantra. A woman tapped a pen against her knee in a rhythm that seemed to have meaning, counting something I couldn't see, measuring time or money or regret in beats per minute. I checked the wall clock, an institutional thing with a white face and black numbers that had probably been ticking in this room since before I was born. 9:44 a.m. 16 minutes until the meeting. 16 minutes until I'd see Sarah again and understand what she thought she was walking into versus what was actually waiting for her. Sarah arrived at 9:56, cutting it close, arriving with exactly 4 minutes to spare, as if she'd timed it to make an entrance without being late enough to seem disrespectful. She wore a dress I'd never seen before, cream-colored and expensive-looking, something she must have bought specifically for this occasion, for this moment when she claimed her inheritance and started her new life. Her hair was different too, styled in a way that had probably cost more than my hotel room. Everything about her appearance screaming that she'd already moved on, already become someone else, someone wealthier, someone who didn't need me anymore. At her side was the same woman from the apartment, the one who'd been there the day before, younger than both of us, maybe late 20s, with bright eyes and an eager posture that reminded me of someone auditioning for a role or trying to impress someone they admired. She carried herself like she was part of something important, like being Sarah's companion at this moment gave her significance by proximity. When Sarah saw me, her expression flickered through surprise, because she probably thought I wouldn't show up, or hoped I wouldn't, or at least hoped I'd show up alone and defeated. Then annoyance because my presence complicated whatever narrative she'd been building. And then something that might have been worry, quickly suppressed, before settling into theatrical disdain. The performance of someone who wanted everyone watching to know she was unbothered, unaffected, completely in control. "Of course you'd show up," she said, loud enough for everyone in the waiting area to hear, loud enough to ensure there was an audience for her dismissal of me. "Can't let go, can you? Can't accept that this part of your life is over?" Jennifer stepped forward before I could respond, which was good because I was still deciding whether silence or truth was the better weapon, still calculating which approach would serve me better in the long run. "Good morning," Jennifer said with a professional courtesy that somehow felt more cutting than sarcasm, the kind of politeness that's actually a demonstration of superior positioning. "We're here for the 10 o'clock review of the Edward Thompson estate. I'm Jennifer Cardozo, representing Mr. Patterson." Sarah's companion leaned in and whispered something I couldn't hear, her expression shifting from eager to uncertain as she registered that I hadn't shown up alone, that I had representation, that this wasn't going to be the simple coronation Sarah had probably described to her. I watched Sarah's jaw tighten in response, saw the muscles working as she processed this unexpected development. We were called into a smaller conference room by a clerk who looked like she'd been doing this job for 30 years and had stopped being surprised by family drama sometime during the first decade. The room was exactly what you'd expect: rectangular table, uncomfortable chairs, fluorescent lighting that made everyone look slightly ill, windows that faced another building, so there was no natural light, no relief from the institutional atmosphere. The estate representative entered a moment later, a man in his late 50s with gray hair and glasses that sat low on his nose, wearing a suit that had been expensive once, but was now just worn, the kind of person whose job is to be unmoved by drama, to read words on paper without inflection or judgment, to execute legal requirements without caring about the human cost. He carried a folder thick enough to suggest this was more complicated than Sarah probably understood, set it down with a soft thud that felt somehow final, and looked around the table with eyes that had seen every variation of greed and grief and family dysfunction. "This is a procedural review," he began, voice neutral and worn smooth by repetition, the tone of someone who'd given this same speech hundreds of times. "It is not a negotiation. It is not a debate. I will read from the relevant sections of the will, clarify certain provisions as needed, and address questions within the scope of my authority. Personal grievances are not within that scope. Family disputes are not within that scope. My role is to execute the wishes of the deceased as they are written, nothing more, nothing less. Is that understood?" Sarah crossed her arms and smiled, the expression of someone who thinks they've already won and is just going through formalities. "I understand," she said. "Let's proceed so we can get this finished." The representative opened the folder and began reading in a voice that turned legal language into something almost musical if music could be made of obligations and restrictions. He identified the estate of Edward James Thompson, deceased as of September 12, confirmed Sarah Rebecca Thompson as primary beneficiary, specified that I, John Michael Patterson, was designated as an observer and verification party as stipulated in Clause 17, subsection B. He listed assets in categories that made them feel more like inventory than Uncle Edward's actual life. Real property including a 4-unit apartment building in Queens valued at approximately $1.8 million, a vacation home in the Catskills valued at $650,000, the marital residence that Sarah and I currently occupied valued at $890,000, investment accounts including stocks, bonds, and mutual funds totaling approximately $3.2 million. A vehicle collection including 2 vintage automobiles valued at $320,000. Personal property and effects valued at approximately $140,000. And cash holdings of approximately $2.1 million. The numbers, when spoken aloud, seemed to shimmer in the air between us, seemed to make the room feel smaller, more charged. Sarah's posture straightened with each figure, her smile growing more confident, more certain, more triumphant. I could see the math happening behind her eyes, the calculations, the things she'd buy, the life she'd build, the freedom she'd have. $8.2 million. More money than either of us had ever imagined having. More money than our parents had made in their entire lives. Enough money to change everything. And then the temperature in the room changed. Not with drama, but with weight, with the introduction of words that had meaning beyond their face value. with the reading of a clause that the representative approached slowly, carefully, as if each word had been placed with intention and required careful handling to preserve that intention. Provisions and restrictions, he read, his pace slowing, his voice taking on a different quality. The beneficiary shall observe the following conditions in accessing and utilizing estate assets. No estate funds, properties, or anticipated proceeds may be used to force removal, eviction, displacement, abandonment, or humiliation of a spouse from a shared residence without lawful process, appropriate notice, demonstrated compliance with applicable housing and family law statutes, and independent verification that such action is not motivated by malice, vindictiveness, or desire for retribution. The room went very quiet. Not the quiet of people finished talking, but the quiet of people processing information they didn't expect, didn't want, didn't know how to respond to. Sarah's smile faltered, not disappearing completely, but freezing in place, becoming something uncertain. That's unusual, she said, trying to sound dismissive but landing closer to confused. I've never heard of a will with that kind of language. It seems very specific, unnecessarily specific. It's what's written, the representative replied without emphasis, without judgment, just fact. The deceased had the right to attach any lawful conditions to the inheritance. This condition is lawful. Jennifer made a note on her legal pad, her expression unchanged, but I saw her shoulders relax slightly, the way someone's posture shifts when they realize the ground beneath them is more solid than expected when a gamble pays off. The representative continued reading, and with each sentence, I watched Sarah's certainty erode like sand under a tide she couldn't see coming. Furthermore, during the initial administrative period, which shall last no fewer than 6 months from the date of this reading, an additional party has been designated to observe documentation, verify compliance with all conditional provisions, and provide written confirmation that the beneficiary is adhering to the spirit and letter of these restrictions. He looked up from the paper and said my full name. John Michael Patterson will serve as designated observer with full access to all estate records, including expenditures, property transfers, and any actions taken that might affect shared marital assets or obligations. My name sounded different when spoken in that room, official and anchored in a way that my name rarely felt, like it carried weight, like it meant something beyond just being the thing people called me. Sarah's companion shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her earlier enthusiasm completely gone, replaced by an expression that suggested she was reassessing her involvement in whatever this was. Sarah herself went very still, the kind of stillness that comes before an explosion or a collapse, the kind that suggests every muscle is tensed, holding something back through sheer force of will. That can't be right, she said, her voice climbing in pitch and volume. He has no claim to this inheritance. He's just my husband, soon-to-be ex-husband. He has no business being involved in my financial affairs. The will designates him as an observer. The representative clarified, his tone suggesting he'd dealt with this kind of objection before and was unmoved by it. Not a beneficiary, which means he receives no direct financial benefit from the estate, but a required witness to certain actions, which means his verification is necessary for you to proceed with any transactions involving estate assets. This is binding. This was Uncle Edward's explicit instruction. Why? Sarah demanded, the word coming out somewhere between a question and an accusation. Why would he do that? What reason could he possibly have? That's not within my purview, the representative said, and something in his tone suggested he had opinions about the question but wasn't paid to share them. I execute what's written. The reasoning, the motivations, the intentions behind specific provisions, those belonged to the deceased. You're welcome to speculate, but my job is simply to ensure the will is followed as written. The reading continued, and with each new section, each new restriction, the inheritance that had seemed like unlimited freedom revealed itself to be something more complicated, more conditional, more controlled. Sarah could not sell any real property for a minimum of 12 months without independent appraisal and verification that the sale was not being made under duress or in haste. She could not access more than $50,000 per month during the administrative period without providing documentation of the intended use and receiving approval from the estate administrator. She could not make any gifts exceeding $10,000 to any individual without written justification. She could not use estate funds to pay for legal actions against family members without specific approval from a probate judge. Each sentence was another layer of complexity, another restriction, another check on her authority. This wasn't a gift. This was a test. Uncle Edward had left her millions of dollars, but he'd wrapped them in so many conditions, so many requirements, so many opportunities to fail, that it felt less like an inheritance and more like a challenge. Maybe he'd seen something in Sarah that I'd missed. Maybe he'd seen the edge my brother had warned me about, the capacity for cruelty that had been hiding underneath the person I thought I'd married. Maybe he'd seen it and decided to protect her from herself, or protect others from her, by making sure she couldn't use his money to cause harm. When the reading concluded, the representative looked around the table with an expression that might have been pity or might have been simple professional fatigue. "Are there questions within the scope of this review?" he asked. Sarah leaned forward, hands pressed flat against the table, and I noticed they were shaking slightly. "When can I access the accounts? When can I actually use this money?" "Not until the administrative period concludes and all conditional provisions are demonstrated to be satisfied," he said. "That timeline will depend on compliance and documentation." "How long?" she pressed, voice tight. "Weeks? Months?" "That depends," he said slowly, "on how cleanly things proceed. If there are no complications, no challenges, no evidence of attempts to circumvent the restrictions, the administrative period could conclude as early as 6 months from today. If there are complications, contested actions, evidence of bad faith, it could extend to a year or longer. The process is designed to ensure that the deceased's wishes are honored, not to maximize speed or convenience for the beneficiary. 6 months to a year. I watched that information land on Sarah, watched her process that the money she'd been counting on, the money she'd already started spending in her head, the money she'd used as justification to blow up our marriage, that money was effectively frozen for at least half a year. Her face went through a series of micro-expressions so fast they almost blurred together. Frustration at the restriction, fear of the timeline, calculation as she tried to figure out some way around it, anger at me, as if I'd somehow caused this, as if Uncle Edward's decision to limit her access was my fault. And finally, a forced calm, the performance of someone trying to maintain composure in front of an audience that she knew was judging her. Outside, after the meeting concluded without ceremony, after we'd been given packets of information and scheduled for a follow-up meeting in 30 days, the sunlight felt aggressive, too bright after the dim conference room, making everyone squint and shield their eyes. Sarah stormed ahead without a word, her cream-colored dress catching the light, her expensive heels clicking against the pavement with a rhythm that sounded angry, her companion struggling to keep up, trying to match Sarah's pace in shoes that clearly weren't made for the speed Sarah was setting. My phone buzzed before I even reached the parking lot. Unknown number. I answered without thinking, still processing what had just happened, still trying to understand the full implications of what Uncle Edward had done. "Mr. Patterson?" a man's voice said, tight with barely controlled panic, the kind of voice that suggests something has gone very wrong and someone needs to fix it immediately. "I'm calling about a property listing. Your marital residence at 447 Riverside Drive, Unit 9C. I was told by Mrs. Patterson that a sale was imminent, that she had full authority to sell, that we could close within days. I wired a deposit last night, $50,000, on the promise that we could finalize the purchase today. But now I'm being told there's no authorization to sell, that the property is tied up in estate proceedings, that Mrs. Patterson may have misrepresented her authority. I need answers. I need them right now. My attorney is talking about filing fraud charges if this isn't resolved immediately." Jennifer held out her hand calmly, and I put the call on speaker and passed her the phone. She spoke with the same measured calm she'd used all morning, the kind of calm that only comes from having dealt with situations like this so many times they've stopped being surprising. "This is Jennifer Cardozo, representing Mr. Patterson. I'm going to need you to take a breath and listen carefully. All real estate transactions involving any property connected to the Edward Thompson estate are currently frozen pending administrative review. Your deposit should not have been accepted. Mrs. Patterson did not have the authority to list the property, much less to accept money for it. You should cease any further transfers immediately and preserve all documentation, every email, every text message, every phone call, everything. We will be sending formal notice to protect your interests and to ensure you can recover your funds." The man's voice cracked, anger giving way to something closer to fear. She told me everything was clear. She told me she'd just inherited millions, that this was a quick sale because she was moving to a bigger place, that we could close immediately if I acted fast. She told me there were other interested buyers and I needed to move quickly to secure it. She was very convincing, very confident. I gave her $50,000 based on that confidence. 50,000, Jennifer repeated, and I saw her lock eyes with me. Saw something pass between us, an understanding that this was worse than we'd thought, that Sarah hadn't just tried to evict me. She'd committed actual fraud, had taken money from a stranger based on authority she didn't have. "Did you receive any documentation confirming her authority to sell? Any letter from an attorney? Any probate court order?" "Just her word," he admitted, and I could hear the realization hitting him, the understanding that he'd been scammed, that his $50,000 was sitting somewhere in Sarah's account with no legal basis for being there, and an email from her personal account saying she was the sole owner and could sell without restriction. I should have done more due diligence. I should have insisted on seeing documentation. But she was so certain, so professional, I trusted her. "Forward everything to the address I'm about to provide," Jennifer said, shifting into command mode. "Every communication you had with Mrs. Patterson, every promise she made, every representation about her authority. Do not communicate further with her without legal counsel present. This is for your protection. If she contacts you, do not respond. Just forward the message to your attorney and to us. This situation is now a legal matter, and casual communication will only complicate it." When the call ended, Jennifer handed me back my phone, and we stood there on the courthouse steps while life continued around us, people coming and going, lawyers in expensive suits talking on cell phones, families gathered in worried clusters, the whole machinery of grief and money and legal process grinding forward. "She's already committed fraud," Jennifer said, not with satisfaction, but with the clinical observation of someone diagnosing a condition, stating a fact. "That deposit creates immediate liability. The buyer will want it back. When he can't get it quickly, when he realizes the full extent of the misrepresentation, pressure builds. And that pressure won't point at you. It points directly at Sarah. Every day this isn't resolved. Every day he doesn't have his money back. His attorney gets more aggressive. The potential charges get more serious." We walked to her car in silence, both of us processing. The city continued around us, massive and indifferent and beautiful in its own uncaring way. Cars passed in an endless stream. A food truck on the corner sold coffee and bagels to people in business clothes who looked like they had places to be and deadlines to meet. A child cried somewhere in the distance, that particular pitch that means genuine distress, not just performance. A bus hissed to a stop, disgorged passengers, took on new ones, and pulled away in a cloud of diesel exhaust. Ordinary moments, ordinary scenes, the kind that felt surreal because everything I thought I knew about my life had been rewritten in the past 30 hours. "What happens now?" I asked as we reached the car, the same practical question I'd been asking since this started, the same need to understand the next step, the next move, the path forward. "Now," Jennifer said, unlocking the doors and settling into the driver's seat while I climbed into the passenger side. "We document everything. Every communication from Sarah, every attempt to intimidate or manipulate or pressure you. We respond to nothing directly from her. Everything goes through me. We let the process work. People like your wife, people who believe intensity equals power, they make a critical mistake. They think that moving fast and talking loud and asserting authority makes them powerful. But intensity without foundation is just noise, and noise loses to documentation every single time. She's created a paper trail that will destroy her if this escalates. Our job is to keep adding to that trail while protecting you from her attempts to drag you into the chaos she's creating." My phone buzzed again before we'd even pulled out of the parking space. Sarah's number. I showed Jennifer the screen, and she shook her head, a simple gesture that meant exactly what I thought it meant. "Don't answer," she said. "Let it go to voicemail. Let her fill up your voicemail if she wants." Every message is evidence of state of mind, evidence of her escalating panic, evidence that can be used later. A voicemail arrived within seconds, and I played it on speaker as Jennifer navigated through downtown traffic. Sarah's voice came through ragged and furious, stripped of the polish she'd had at the meeting, raw in a way I'd rarely heard. "You did this," she said, and there was almost a sob underneath the words, emotion breaking through the anger. "You poisoned everything. You must have talked to Uncle Edward before he died, turned him against me, convinced him to put in those horrible restrictions. That buyer is threatening me, says he's going to file charges, says I committed fraud. The estate attorney is asking questions I can't answer. The brokerage is demanding I return money I've already spent planning my new life. You think you're clever, but you're just petty and vindictive. This is my inheritance. Mine. I earned it by being family, by visiting him when no one else would, by caring about him. You're going to regret making this difficult. You're going to regret not just signing those papers and disappearing like I asked. I saved the recording and slipped the phone into my pocket." The accusation that I'd somehow influenced Uncle Edward was particularly absurd considering I'd met the man maybe 5 times in 11 years, brief encounters at holiday gatherings where we'd exchanged pleasantries about weather and sports, and never anything substantial. If he'd written those restrictions, it wasn't because of anything I'd said. It was because of something he'd seen in Sarah herself. "Add it to the file," Jennifer said, her eyes fixed on the road ahead. "She's creating her own prosecution." Every message like that establishes that she knew about the restrictions, that she chose to ignore them, that she proceeded anyway with the listing and the deposit because she thought she could get away with it. That's not a mistake. That's willful disregard for the terms of the will. That makes everything worse for her. By early afternoon, I was back at the hotel, spreading documents across the small desk in the room that had become my temporary command center. Emails printed out and organized by date. Screenshots arranged in chronological order. Voicemails transcribed, so there was a written record in addition to the audio. Call logs showing when Sarah had contacted me and how many times. Everything arranged in careful rows like evidence at a crime scene where the criminal kept signing their name, kept adding to the pile of proof of their own wrongdoing. At 1:47 p.m., another email arrived, this one from Sarah's attorney, the name that had appeared on the fake separation papers, the letterhead that had tried to look official but was just expensive stationery. The tone had shifted completely from the aggressive confidence of the theatrical documents Sarah had left on the table to something cautious and distancing, the sound of someone realizing they'd been handed a liability and trying to put it down as gently as possible without admitting they'd been handling something toxic. "Dear Mr. Patterson, please direct all future communication regarding the dissolution of your marriage through appropriate legal channels. My client, Mrs. Sarah Thompson, will cease direct contact pending the initiation of formal proceedings. Any questions about estate matters should be directed to the probate administrator. Any questions about marital property should be directed through your legal representation. This office will not be handling any matters related to property sales or transfers at this time. Regards, Mitchell Whitmore, ESQ." It was the sound of someone backing away, creating distance, making sure their name wasn't too closely associated with whatever Sarah had done or was planning to do. Jennifer called at 2:15, and I could hear the satisfaction in her voice, subtle but present. "The listing has been pulled from every real estate website," she said. "The brokerage is conducting an internal review of how a property without clear title was listed in the first place. The deposit is in an escrow account, frozen pending resolution. The buyer's attorney has sent a formal demand letter. Your wife is now facing questions from multiple directions, and none of the answers make her look good. She created this situation by moving too fast, by assuming her inheritance gave her more authority than it actually did, and now she's dealing with the consequences." "What about the apartment?" I asked, the practical question about where I actually lived, whether I could go back or whether I was stuck in hotels indefinitely. "We'll file for temporary orders this afternoon preventing any change to the locks, occupancy status, or property status until the estate matters are resolved and the marital dissolution is properly handled through the courts," Jennifer said. "She can't throw you out. She can't sell it. She can't use it as leverage. She's boxed. The money is frozen. The property is frozen. Her only move is to wait and comply with the terms Uncle Edward set, and based on her behavior so far, compliance isn't her strong suit." "How long does this take?" I asked, thinking about hotel rooms and temporary living and the strange limbo of not knowing where home was anymore. "Weeks, Maybe months for the immediate questions, Jennifer said. The full estate administration, given all the restrictions and the observation requirements, could take a year or more. But time is working for you now, not against you. Every day, she can't access that money. Every day, the buyer's attorney is asking questions. Every day, she has to explain why she moved so fast and ignored the will's terms. The story gets harder for her to control. The longer this takes, the more evidence accumulates, the worse her position becomes, and the better yours becomes. That evening, alone in the hotel room that smelled like industrial cleaner and other people's lives, I sat on the edge of the bed and let myself feel something I hadn't allowed since Sarah's first call. Not triumph, because there was nothing triumphant about watching someone self-destruct. Not vindication, because being right about someone's character when they prove themselves to be cruel isn't actually a victory. Just a quiet recognition that I'd made the right choice in not collapsing when she'd expected me to, in not signing and disappearing, in not letting her narrative become the only narrative, in asking questions and documenting answers, and trusting that process would protect me when intensity tried to overwhelm me. She'd counted on panic, on me being so shocked and hurt that I'd sign whatever she put in front of me, on me accepting her version of reality because challenging it seemed too difficult. She'd counted on me disappearing quietly so she could rewrite our 11 years into a story where I was always leaving and she was always moving on to bigger and better things. But panic requires belief that the person hurting you holds all the power, and somewhere between that first phone call at my desk and this hotel room with documents spread across every surface, I'd stopped believing that. My phone buzzed one more time that day, cutting through the quiet. Sarah's number again. I almost didn't answer, had developed a reflex of letting her calls go to voicemail, but something in the timing felt different, less aggressive, more uncertain. I picked up. "John," she said, and her voice was different now, stripped of the performance, smaller, almost tentative. "I didn't think it would go like this." "You didn't think," I replied, keeping my voice neutral. "Or you didn't care?" Silence on her end, just breathing and background noise that sounded like traffic or wind, sounds of the outside world continuing while we had this conversation. "The buyer is saying I committed fraud," she finally said, the words coming slowly like she was having trouble saying them out loud. "His attorney sent a letter. It uses words like misrepresentation and bad faith and potential criminal charges. The estate attorney is asking about the listing, asking why I thought I had authority to sell when the will clearly requires a waiting period. The brokerage is talking about reporting me to the real estate board. My attorney won't return my calls. My friend who was supposed to help me move won't answer her phone. This is all falling apart, and I don't understand how it happened so fast." "You tried to sell something you don't own," I said, the simple truth stated without embellishment. "You took money under false pretenses from someone who trusted you. That has consequences. Those consequences don't care about your intentions or your expectations or what you thought the inheritance meant. They just exist. You could fix this," she said, and I heard the desperation creeping into her voice like water seeping into a basement. "You're the observer. You could tell them it was a misunderstanding. You could verify that I was acting in good faith, that I didn't know about the restrictions when I listed the apartment. You could help make this go away." "It wasn't a misunderstanding," I said quietly. "You got the email about the meeting before you called me at work. You saw my name listed as an observer. You knew there were going to be conditions and restrictions. You chose to proceed anyway with throwing me out and listing the apartment because you thought you could move fast enough that it wouldn't matter. You thought if you acted before the meeting, before the restrictions were officially explained, you could create facts on the ground that would be hard to undo. That's not misunderstanding. That's calculation. And it failed." Her breath caught. That sound people make when they're trying not to cry but failing. "So that's it. You're just going to let me crash? Let me lose everything? Let my name get destroyed because of one mistake? I'm going to let you face what you created," I said, and I meant it with a clarity that surprised me. There's a difference between helping someone and rescuing them from consequences they brought on themselves. You didn't make one mistake, Sarah. You made a series of choices. You chose to call me at work to humiliate me. You chose to leave the apartment door unlocked like I was an intruder. You chose to create fake legal documents. You chose to list the apartment before you had authority. You chose to take someone's money based on promises you couldn't keep. Those weren't mistakes. Those were choices. And choices have consequences. The call ended without goodbye. The line just going dead, like she'd hung up mid-thought, or like her phone had died, or like she couldn't bear to hear another word. I set the phone down and looked at the digital clock on the nightstand, red numbers glowing in the dim room. 8:47 p.m. Less than 30 hours since that first call at my desk, since the moment my life had split in two, and Sarah's certainty had already crumbled into something that looked a lot like panic. I didn't feel joy at that observation. I didn't feel the satisfaction I might have expected. I felt something closer to sadness, not for what she was losing because she'd never actually had it. The money was always conditional, always restricted, always less than she'd imagined. But sadness for what we'd both lost the moment she decided that money, even conditional money, even money she couldn't access for months, was worth more than integrity, worth more than the 11 years we'd built together, worth more than basic human decency. The next morning, I woke early, that particular kind of early that happens when your brain won't let you sleep anymore because it's too busy processing, and I checked my phone out of habit. No new messages from Sarah. No threats, no pleas, no accusations, nothing. The silence felt significant, like the pause before a storm changes direction, like the moment when someone realizes fighting isn't working and hasn't decided yet what strategy to try next. Jennifer called at 9:15 while I was drinking hotel coffee and pretending it was good. The buyer's attorney has filed a formal complaint with the real estate board, she said, her tone businesslike, but with an undercurrent of something that might have been satisfaction at watching a case develop exactly as predicted. They're also threatening a civil suit for fraudulent inducement, asking for the return of the deposit plus damages for time and opportunity cost. Your wife's attorney, Mitchell Whitmore, has officially withdrawn representation, cited a conflict of interest that probably means he figured out she lied to him about her authority to sell, and he doesn't want his name attached to whatever happens next. She's alone now, legally speaking, at the exact moment when she most needs competent counsel. What should I do? I asked, the question I'd been asking since this started, the need for direction from someone who understood these systems better than I did. Nothing, Jennifer said firmly. Absolutely nothing. This is the hardest part for most people, understanding that inaction is sometimes the best action. Let the machinery work. Let the complaints process through the official channels. Let the buyer's attorney pursue their remedies. Let Sarah scramble to find new representation. You're not the one who needs to act. She is, and every move she makes now is desperate. Desperate people make mistakes, and mistakes become records, and records become consequences. Your job is to stay out of the way and let her create more evidence of her poor judgment. And the inheritance? I asked, thinking about the money that had started all of this, the millions that Sarah had counted on and that remained frustratingly out of reach. Still locked in administrative review, Jennifer confirmed. Given Sarah's actions, given the unauthorized listing and the deposit, given her apparent unwillingness or inability to comply with the will's restrictions, it could be 6 months to a year before anything transfers. And that's only if all conditions are eventually satisfied, which is starting to look questionable. Uncle Edward wrote those restrictions for a reason, and Sarah is demonstrating exactly why they were necessary. She's proving his judgment correct with every choice she makes. I spent that day doing something I hadn't done in weeks, maybe months. I went for a long walk through the city with no destination, no agenda, just movement. I walked through neighborhoods I'd never explored, past buildings I'd never noticed, watching people live their lives in all their complicated, messy, beautiful ordinariness. A couple argued on a corner about directions, the kind of low-stakes argument that suggested deep comfort with each other. An old man fed pigeons from a bench, talking to them like they were old friends who'd stopped by for a visit. A woman jogged past with earbuds in, face set in that expression of determined misery that suggests she hates running, but does it anyway. A teenager skateboarded down the sidewalk with more confidence than skill, nearly crashing into a mailbox and laughing about it. The world was full of people carrying their own weight, their own stories, their own moments of betrayal and resilience, and everything in between. I was just one more, just another person trying to figure out how to keep moving forward when the map I'd been following turned out to be wrong. By the time I returned to the hotel, hours later, the sun was starting its descent, painting the sky in colors that didn't care about estate law or failed marriages or any human concerns at all. just doing what it did every evening with the same indifferent beauty. My phone showed 3 missed calls from unknown numbers, which I'd learned to ignore unless they left voicemails, and 1 voicemail from a number I recognized, Sarah's mother, Margaret. I played it, curious about what she might say, how she'd been briefed on the situation, whose version of events she'd heard. Her voice was careful, measured, trying to sound neutral but landing somewhere closer to concerned, maybe even apologetic. "John, I heard what happened," she said, and I could picture her sitting in her kitchen with the good phone, the landline she still maintained despite everyone telling her she didn't need it. "Sarah told me her version, but it doesn't sound right. It doesn't sound like the whole story. She said you're trying to steal her inheritance, that you're making everything difficult out of spite. But I've known you for 11 years, and that doesn't sound like you. If you need anything, if you want to talk, call me. No matter what happens between you and Sarah, you'll always be family to me." I saved the voicemail but didn't return the call. Not yet. Some relationships need time to settle before you know how to proceed with them. Some bridges you don't burn, you just stop maintaining, and eventually time does the work for you. Shows you whether the connection is worth preserving or whether it was always more about circumstance than genuine bond. That night, lying in another anonymous hotel bed, I thought about what I'd learned in the past 4 days. Everything that had changed since Tuesday afternoon when my phone buzzed with Sarah's name, and everything I thought I knew proved to be wrong. I'd learned that documents matter more than volume, that quiet record-keeping is more powerful than loud assertions of authority. I'd learned that patience looks like weakness until it becomes strength, that the person who stays calm while everyone else is panicking usually comes out ahead. I'd learned that the person who moves first doesn't always move best, that speed without strategy is just flailing. Most importantly, I'd learned that I'd spent 11 years with someone I didn't actually know, and that the stranger I'd married had done me a favor by showing me exactly who she was before I wasted another decade finding out gradually. 3 weeks later, I sat in Jennifer's office signing actual legal documents, the kind with case numbers and court seals and language that meant something beyond theater, that would actually be enforced by judges and bailiffs and the full machinery of the legal system. Temporary orders securing my right to occupy the apartment until the marital property was properly divided. Observation protocols giving me access to estate records and requiring Sarah to provide quarterly reports on her compliance with the will's restrictions. A formal cease and desist warning Sarah against any further harassment or attempts to intimidate me. Everything documented, everything official, everything designed to create clear boundaries that even someone as aggressive as Sarah couldn't ignore without serious consequences. "The buyer's lawsuit is moving forward," Jennifer said, sliding the final document across her desk for my signature. "They're asking for the full $50,000 plus another $20,000 in damages. Sarah still hasn't returned the money, which suggests she already spent it, which makes her position significantly worse. The estate administration has flagged multiple irregularities in her attempts to access funds, each one adding time to the review period. And according to the latest filing, she's living with a friend and working with her third attorney in as many weeks, which tells me she keeps being told things she doesn't want to hear and assumes the problem is the messenger." "Has she tried to contact you directly?" I asked, curious whether Sarah was still trying to work around the official channels, still trying to find some shortcut that would let her avoid the consequences accumulating around her. "Twice," Jennifer confirmed. "Both times asking if you'd be willing to mediate, to sit down and work something out informally. I told her that any mediation would have to wait until after the estate issues are resolved, after the buyer's claim is settled, and after she's demonstrated sustained compliance with the will's terms." Which is a tactful way of saying no, but leaves the door open someday if she actually changes her behavior. "Do you think she will?" I asked. "Change her behavior?" Jennifer leaned back in her chair, considering the question. "People can change," she said slowly, "but it usually requires hitting bottom, requires facing consequences they can't avoid or explain away. Sarah hasn't hit bottom yet. She's still in the phase where she thinks the problem is everything and everyone else. Until she accepts that she created this situation, until she takes responsibility for her choices, no, I don't think she'll change. She'll just keep looking for shortcuts that don't exist." 6 months after that first phone call, I moved into a different apartment, smaller than the corner unit Sarah and I had shared, but entirely mine, chosen by me. decorated according to my taste without compromise or negotiation. I furnished it slowly, deliberately, buying pieces that fit the space in my life rather than making do with whatever matched someone else's vision. A couch that was comfortable rather than stylish. A desk with good light for the work I did in the evenings. Bookshelves that actually held books instead of decorative objects arranged for visual effect. Plants, which I'd always wanted but Sarah had vetoed because she said they made places look messy. I worked the same job, reported to the same office, sat at the same desk where I'd answered that call 6 months earlier. The sameness was comforting, proof that my whole life hadn't been upended, that some things remained stable even when marriage and home and future all shifted. I had the same friends, though some relationships had become strained when people felt compelled to choose sides in a divorce that wasn't actually about sides, but about one person's choices and another person's refusal to be destroyed by them. I lived the same mostly ordinary life I'd always lived, unremarkable by any external measure. The only difference was that now I understood something fundamental about myself. I wasn't the man who needed rescue or revenge. I was the man who kept showing up, who documented carefully, who let process do the work that emotion couldn't. I was the man who asked questions when given orders, who preserved evidence when shown theater, who stayed calm when chaos tried to overwhelm him. Sarah got her inheritance eventually, though by the time the administrative period ended and all the conditions were grudgingly satisfied, by the time she'd paid back the buyer and covered legal fees and settled multiple disputes about her attempts to circumvent restrictions, the $8.2 million had been reduced to something closer to $5 million. Still life-changing money by any measure, still more than most people would see in a lifetime, but significantly less mythical than she'd imagined that first day when she called to tell me she was rich and I was out. Last I heard through the network of mutual acquaintances that still existed despite our separation, she'd moved to another state, Arizona or Nevada, somewhere with sun and new beginnings. She'd started over with a new job that involved her inheritance money somehow, investments or real estate or something I didn't fully understand. She had a new story about how her difficult ex-husband had complicated everything out of spite, how he'd tried to steal her inheritance, how she'd escaped a toxic situation and build a new life. I didn't correct anyone who repeated that version. The people who mattered knew the truth because they'd been there, or because I'd shown them the documentation when they asked. The people who didn't matter, who wanted a simple story about a bad divorce, I let them have Sarah's version. It was easier than explaining the reality, and I'd learned that trying to correct everyone's misconceptions is exhausting and usually pointless. Truth doesn't need defending to people who aren't interested in it. If you're reading this because you've been where I was, sitting at your desk or in your car or in a hotel room wondering how someone you loved could become someone you don't recognize, wondering how to respond when someone tries to use money or authority or sheer volume to make you disappear, I want you to hear this clearly. The shock isn't the betrayal itself, though that hurts in ways that take time to heal. The shock is discovering you're stronger than the person who tried to break you. The shock is learning that you can survive something you thought would destroy you. The shock is realizing that what felt like the end of your life was actually just the end of a chapter, and chapters end so new ones can begin. When someone tells you to get out, to sign, to accept less than you deserve, to shrink yourself to fit their narrative, your first instinct might be panic. That's normal. That's human. That's the reasonable response to sudden threat. But somewhere beneath that panic, if you listen carefully, there's a voice asking the questions that matter. Who says? What authority? What process? What proof? Listen to that voice. Trust that voice. Follow that voice even when it feels safer to just comply and make the conflict stop. Document what happens. Save the emails, the texts, the voicemails. Take screenshots with timestamps visible. Write down what was said and when and who witnessed it. Create a record because memory fades and emotions cloud, and months later you'll need to prove what happened. And the only thing that matters in those moments is evidence. Not feeling, not memory, evidence. Stay calm not because you're unaffected. Anyone would be affected by betrayal, but because calm is armor against chaos. When someone is shouting or threatening or trying to intimidate you into action, your calm refusal to react the way they expect is more powerful than any argument you could make. Calm says, you don't control me anymore. Calm says, I'm thinking clearly while you're not. Calm says, I'm playing a longer game than you understand. And remember that the person shouting orders is often the person most afraid of what happens when you stop obeying. People who have actual power rarely need to perform it. Real authority doesn't need volume. Real strength doesn't need threats. Sarah thought she'd won the moment she inherited millions. What she actually won was a spotlight on every flaw in her character, every shortcut she was willing to take, every lie she told herself about who she was and what she deserved. Money didn't change her. It revealed her. It gave her permission to show parts of herself she'd been hiding or suppressing, and what those parts showed wasn't pretty. And revelation, I've learned, is the one thing people like her can't survive. They can survive opposition, can fight against external obstacles, can blame others for their failures. But they can't survive being clearly seen, can't survive having their true nature documented and preserved and presented back to them. The truth about who they are becomes inescapable, and that's worse than any punishment someone else could impose. I don't know where you're listening from or what brought you to this story, but if it resonated, I'd like to know why. Drop a comment below and tell me what you would have done differently, or what moment hit hardest, or what you're taking away from this, or just where you're listening from tonight. Whether you're in a hotel room of your own, or sitting in your car before going inside, or lying in bed unable to sleep because your mind won't stop processing what happened. These stories matter because they remind us that we're not alone in the moments that try to break us. We share them, we learn from them, and we keep moving forward, one careful, documented step at a time.